Lo sai per un gol, io darei la mia vita, in fondo lo so, sarà una partita infinita.
Hello there, welcome to the Football Bloc. My name is Brandon, and today I have a special guest here. We have Julian, who is a passionate Inter fan. And we're going to look ahead to the Champions League final, specifically looking at Inter and the run here. We're going to dispel some rumors and some myths because I feel Inter has been severely underrated and a lot of people have kind of brushed them aside and not given them a chance, even though the match hasn't even started yet. We have Julian here, who's, like I said, passionate Inter fan, so he's going to give us a very in-depth background and rundown of exactly what this team has done so far to earn their spot in the Champions League final, and then maybe a little prediction for how the game's going to go. So, Julian, let's start off with looking at how this team got there. How did Inter get to the Champions League final? Because if you go back to August, the beginning of the season, and you told me that this Inter Milan team would be playing in the Champions League final, I would not have believed you. So how exactly did this happen? You know, is it more so on Inzaghi? Did the team just get lucky? Is it a combination of a bunch of players playing good at the same time? What exactly happened here?
Yeah, no, I think starting from August is a good starting point because, like you said, the group stage was definitely not a simple group. We had Bayern from Pot A and then Barcelona from Pot B. And not a lot of people, including many Inter fans, expected Inter to make the knockout stage, to be honest, because obviously in a group with Barcelona and Bayern, it's not easy. So I think just the group stage was a struggle in and of itself, especially starting off having to play Bayern in the first game and losing. You're already on the back foot. And I think Inzaghi has recently said that that tough group really contributed to Inter making the final because the second game was almost like a final in and of itself because you're going and you're playing Victoria Pilsen and you know that if you don't pick up 3 points already in the second match day, the chances of you even looking at the knockout stages are pretty hard. So I think that feeling of every game being a final, in Italian say, una finale, you have to treat it like a final, really has shaped the course. And then once, that sort of really intense third match day against Barcelona where Çalhanoğlu, scores from outside the box, and Inter's able to hang on with some controversy. Dumfries handball, you might remember, not being given. It was just what the team needed to really, start to believe. And they believed, and they were able to see out the group stage. And then, as you know, it was everything fell into place just sort of the right way.
Yeah, I agree. As a Barcelona fan, I can't say I was the most delighted with that referee decision. But at the same time, a lot of Barcelona fans have said, the system's rigged against Barcelona. I'm not going to take it that far. I think it was just a simple mistake. Not to mention, there's no refereeing that can excuse for just the poor defending that Barcelona had in the return fixture at the Camp Nou, that 3-3 result there, which kind of killed Barcelona's Champions League hopes at that point. That there's no refereeing errors or anything that you can blame for that. That was just, on Barcelona themselves. So going into the knockout stages, and you have, Porto, Benfica, and then AC Milan, specifically those two Portuguese teams, a lot of people have said, Inter, they had an easy run to the final. This was the luckiest run to the final. And while I do think if you compare Manchester City's run to the final to Inter has visibly the easier run, it is by no means luck or anything like that. Like, it is by no means a cakewalk. Porto, I thought, played really well. Benfica, they kind of hit a rough patch, but still, throughout the rest of the season, they're one of the best teams in Europe. And then AC Milan is their crosstown rival. So what do you think specifically about these matches? Like, do you think that do you think that they were easy matches, or do you think that there's more to it than that? There's more nuance to it?
I think you're right. I think there is more nuance. On an individual level, it's you have to say that there is not a resounding amount of world-class talent in those three teams we faced. However, as groups, as complete teams, none of those games were easy. Especially the Porto game, the second leg of that Porto draw, was truly was excruciating. The last 10 minutes, especially in the Dragao, it was intense. Onana made some fantastic saves. Dumfries cleared one off the line. So it was not an easy path to the finals. I think a lot of that narrative probably comes from just the fact that it's Inter. Liverpool last year went to the finals, and their path to the final was pretty similar as the one we faced this year. And I don't remember the narrative going into that Liverpool-Real Madrid final being, oh, Liverpool's lucky to be here. I personally don't remember that being a big narrative that I heard. Obviously, it's the way it's shaped up with some of the big teams, we'll say new big teams being all on one side, and then the very Italian-based side of the bracket kind of led to that narrative. But like you said, it was none of those games were easy. The Milan game, surprisingly, probably ended up being the easiest one as far as the amount of chances that Inter created and just the amount of liberty and the way that Inzaghi set up the team. But as you know, the psychological challenge of that game is huge with the history between the two clubs and the fact that Inter, the Euro Derby has happened 2 other times this century, and both times Milan advanced. So Inter, it was almost like they were not only battling Milan, but they were battling the history of the rivalry. So it was really hard. It was really hard path to the final as far as the way. And in the middle of all of that, you had a really complicated spring in the league, which really added a lot of pressure to Inzaghi. I can't pretend that there were many times during the spring, the late winter, when I didn't want to see Inzaghi let go. I have to be honest. Obviously, now looking back on it, I'm glad that the Marotta and the Dirigenza made different decisions. But I think that with the results in the league being so stagnant, losing to Monza, losing to Spezia, I was surprised, honestly, that Inzaghi wasn't let go. But that Benfica tie in the quarters, really, the team united after that. You could see it on the pitch. You could see it in the interviews. That first win, going to Portugal and winning that first leg, was so big for the psychology of this team. And it really, since then, things have really, picked up, and it's been really great to see.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I was just about to bring up that statistic about how, I believe it was from March until May, Inter only won 1 game in Serie A. I'm glad you brought that up already, because it's almost as if they're 2 different teams in Serie A and in the Champions League, at least through that period, because you mentioned it, they lost to Monza and Spezia, but then they would go and wipe the floor with Benfica. I personally thought, you can look back at my predictions on this channel, I thought that Benfica was going to pretty convincingly go through. But I do think that, Inter picked it up, especially in the last few weeks in Serie A. They've had some good results. It's not been consistent, though. They lost to Napoli. But do you think that calling Inzaghi a cup specialist, or a guy that specializes in cup tournaments but not so much in league form, do you think that is kind of too broad of a characterization, or do you think that that's pretty fair?
I think it's apt. I think it's completely apt, because even at Lazio, if you look at Inzaghi's past, he won the Coppa Italia with Lazio. That's not easy. He got out of a pretty tricky group in the Champions League, ended up losing to Bayern in the knockout stage with Lazio. But since he's come to Inter, he's been here for 2 seasons, 2 Coppa Italia wins, 2 Supercoppa Italiana wins. What was honestly a pretty impressive, bringing Inter back to the Champions League knockout stage after a decade, doing that last year, ended up losing in a very tough match at Anfield in the second leg. And then this year, making it to the final already. So I think calling him a cup specialist, I don't see it as an insult. I think I see it as praising what his record is as a manager. It's true that in the league he's had some inconsistencies, like you said, but I think he's more than made up with it with his cup performance. And really, he's not someone who gives off a confident vibe. He's not someone who exudes confidence, maybe like a Conte figure, or like a Mourinho, but clearly in the locker room, with the players. He's saying the right things. He's making the right changes. And yeah, at this point in time, I feel like he can't be critiqued, especially because, like you said, he has turned around the league. There was a long stretch there, like you said, in the spring and the winter where really if Inter conceded first, there was almost, I didn't see a way for Inter to get back into the game, but that really flipped recently. And I think since the Lazio game, when Inter gave the ball away, Lazio scored, this was probably about a month ago, Inter was able to turn around, end up winning well. And that really, I think, was another little piece of the puzzle in the team seeing that they can come back. If you go behind, it's not the end. And then since then, Inter's, come back a couple times. In the Coppa Italia final last week against Fiorentina, Nico Gonzalez scored in the first minute. And that was like, he scored right away. It was like, oh my God, how's Inter going to do? And then the team, you could see, grew in confidence. And then, Lautaro Martinez scored a brace and Inter lifted the cup.
Yep. Very, very good point. I totally agree. And to go back a little bit, you mentioned how the Milan derby in the semifinals was, if anything, the easiest out of all those opponents in the knockout stage. Why do you think that is? Is that more so just Milan kind of, reaching a limit because the team is, for the most part, relatively young and inexperienced? Was it just a tactical masterclass from Inzaghi just outsmarting Pioli? Or was it somewhere in the middle or something else completely? Because that game really caught me off guard. I thought it was going to be really close, really, back and forth. And I do think that there was moments in the tie where it was close. Like I want to say like beginning of the second half in the first leg, or maybe even the beginning of the first half in the second leg. But in the grand scheme of things, it finished 3-0 to Inter, and Milan really didn't trouble Onana in goal that much. So why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at all the times that Inter's faced Milan with Inzaghi at the helm, individual in any of those games, I don't think there's been a game where Milan has outplayed Inter. There's been times that Milan has beaten Inter, famously last year in the derby when Inter was up, Perisic scored and then Giroud scored a brace, and that was kind of the catalyst for Milan going and winning the league last season. But as far as like looking at performance on the field, chances created, possession, I really think that Inter with Inzaghi has really done very well against Milan. And this season, yeah, like you said, in the knockout stages, it was like I was seeing Inter play against Milan, and I was seeing them actually put those chances away in a way that maybe they weren't clinical in other games against Milan. And I think that was really the difference. When you get two early goals, and I think especially the second one, the Mkhitaryan goal, that was just, it was so like soon after Dzeko scored. And I think that just the morale dipped. Benacer ended, having to come off injured, and really the team was overwhelmed. That Milan was overwhelmed by Inter's approach to the game. I think tactically speaking, a lot of it was just the midfield battle. Inter dominated the midfield. Krunic really was overwhelmed by everything he was facing. The Barella did such a good job of just coming off and just switching his position, gathering everything, just an overall great performance by him. And the whole Inter midfield played fantastically that first leg. And then in the second leg, I was expecting more from Milan, like you said. I was expecting a more bold approach from Pioli, really going for it, especially with Rafa Leao being back. But aside from, one or two chances, it really was Inter, I think, who created more, which was surprising since the onus was on Milan to go and attack. But yeah, I was thrilled with the performance and the attitude of the team.
Yeah, I totally see your point there. I think that, I don't know if you agree or not, but I think that first 45 minutes of the first leg is the best football that I've seen Inter play this whole season. I haven't watched every game, but I just, the way that they played, you talked about how the midfield dominated. Every single player on the pitch I thought played well, but specifically those midfielders, Mkhitaryan, and Luka Barella, Çalhanoğlu. Inter could have been up 4-0 within the first, 35 minutes, because Çalhanoğlu hit the post, and then Lautaro had a penalty which was taken off, which I think was, I think there was contact, but he over exaggerated. If he didn't,
I agree
as much. It probably would have been a penalty. But and I also heavily agree with your point. I was disappointed by Milan's performance in the second leg. I really wanted to see an open game back and forth, and Milan, after that one chance, I believe it was Brahim Diaz, kind of scuffed his shot. After that, I think Milan just completely deflated, and Inter just rode it out, waited for their chances to come, and eventually one did come through, Lautaro. I guess my next question would be, now that Inter has made it to the final, there's been a lot of talk of saying, okay, Man City's already won this, right? But I think that's kind of insulting towards Inter to look at how far they've come and how well they played. Specifically, when you look at Inter's front line, whether it be Dzeko or Lukaku, with Lautaro up top and then that midfield backing up, I think they can cause some serious trouble to Manchester City's back line. But who is it going to be, Dzeko or Lukaku? Because Dzeko has been very reliable there. I believe he has 14 goals all competitions so far. But at the same time, Lukaku is the main man. Lukaku won the Scudetto with you guys 2 years ago, and he had a very poor World Cup. He was very poor after the World Cup. He had some injuries, but now he's back in form. He's, for all intents and purposes, he's back. He has that confidence. He's able to take on players and dribble past him and stuff. Inzaghi's been employing him off the bench, but at the same time, if you look at just that telepathic connection that Lautaro and Lukaku have, why not start him and have that the entire game, just terrorizing that back line for Man City? So, in your opinion, who do you think is going to start? And also, who do you think should start? What approach do you think Inzaghi should go with?
Yeah, if you asked me anytime before this past week, I probably would have said Inzaghi was going to start Dzeko. Inzaghi's not someone, if something is working, he's not one who wants to tinker. He's not really a tinker. He likes to have a stable approach. And Dzeko's played, started at least every Champions League game pretty much. So I would have expected. However, against Atalanta last week, the Lautaro Lukaku connection started the game, and then today we're recording this, having this conversation Saturday morning. Later today, it's expected. A lot of good reporting is saying that Lautaro and Lukaku will start against Torino in the last Serie A game of the year. So I think the fact that he's playing them together in back-to-back to round out the season, I think it points to him really trying to get them on the same page, which they have been the last month, going into the Champions League final. Having said that, I wouldn't be surprised to see Dzeko start. It really depends. I think he's trying to keep his options open. He's trying to make Pep maybe guess for what it's worth. But if you ask me, my personal opinion, I would like to see Lukaku start. I just think he just offers a different dimension to the team. His hold-up play has just been really sharp the last month. The ball's kind of stuck to his foot in a way that I haven't seen since, that second year under Conte. So I would love to see that connection. And like you said, the telepathic, the Lautaro really seems to have benefit a lot from playing alongside Lukaku. Dzeko and Lautaro have had some good moments in link-up, but few and far between, to be honest.
Yeah, that's very true. My personal opinion, I think it depends, because Inzaghi, like you said, he runs like clockwork. It almost like you can predict when he's going to make a substitution. You can tell who's going to come on at what time. So I personally would like to see Lukaku on the pitch as long as possible. So if he starts, you kind of expect that he's going to get subbed off at one point. But same thing with Dzeko. So I think if this match, hypothetically, if it does go to extra time or something like that, I think it would be more important to have Lukaku on the pitch. So I guess that would mean starting Dzeko. But at the same time, who knows? You can't really predict if the match is going to go that long. So I would probably lean towards I'd like to see Lukaku start, just for the joy of seeing that partnership there. Now, I mentioned it briefly already, but there's been so much, I think, kind of backhanded comments towards Inter by just the general media. Now, again, we live in the United States, so it's English-speaking media, there's always going to be a bias towards the Premier League, towards England, because, you know, the English-speaking media, but also, of course, all the money that's in the Premier League. That being said, you know, we have to address the elephant in the room. I mean, Manchester City is the best team in the world. The way that they completely just destroyed Bayern Munich and Real Madrid, it's almost like scary to think about. Now, of course, Inter's in the final, though. They have a 50-50 shot at it. There's only 2 teams in the final. It can go either way, just statistically. What would you say to all those people that are just writing off Inter already? Do you think that there is a little bit of truth in that because Man City is so good? Or do you think that people are just, you know, there's so much just bias towards English teams in the Premier League that this is the reason why? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's like you said. I mean, I think people in the media who are saying Inter don't have any chance, that's wrong. It's a game, it's 90 minutes. I mean, I know that this iteration of Man City is probably the strongest we've seen under Pep. He's really built a well-oiled machine. But if you look at their, you know, Champions League past under Pep, they've been knocked out by Monaco. They've been knocked out by Lyon. These are not teams who I would say are vastly better than Inter. They're on the same level as Inter. Inter might be even better than them. Having said that, though, like you said, it's 90 minutes. Anything can happen. I would say it really depends. I mean, like you said, I think the way in which they took care of business in the second leg against Real Madrid, that really was almost like a testament to just the work that Pep has done. Just the way Real Madrid are kings of this competition, and just the way they handled it was really crazy to see. So I think that gave a lot of people in the media maybe that extra conviction that there's just nothing that can stop this team. But this is a neutral ground. This is in Istanbul. It's not at the Etihad. You know, I think you're going to hear a lot more Inter support in the stands, even though there's going to be the same amount of Inter fans as Manchester City fans. Just the Curva Nord is going to be loud, and I think Inter could have a atmosphere that really pushes them on. But I can totally understand people who think Inter don't have a chance because Man City is the best team in the world. They've proven that time and time again, both in the league and the last couple years in the Champions League. They've been really good.
Yeah, I do agree with you, but at the same time, it is hard. It's very hard to you know, not favor Man City with just how imposing they are, how just, you know, crazy that they'll press you and force you into mistakes and put you through a vice grip and just really choke you out. Specifically, if you look at Inter's team, though, player by player, we already looked at, you know, the front line with Dzeko and Lukaku alongside Lautaro. Who is a player that you would say is the standout player besides anyone in the front line, besides any of the strikers? Who do you think is the key player that if Inter having a chance to win, that this guy will be the key to it?
I'm going to give 2 players. I'm going to say Barella and Bastoni. Bastoni being the center back and Barella the midfielder. I think those 2 really, really are leaders of the team. And they're so important in chance creation in different ways. I mean, Bastoni has shown since probably 2019 that as far as distribution and just overall ability on the ball, there's probably not many in European football who I'd rate above him as far as defenders. He's got an amazing left foot. He can whip in crosses. We saw it against Benfica. He had a beautiful cross that Barella got on the end of and scored a header from. But also just charging runs, trying to just win one-on-one matchups. He's really great. I would say, and obviously Barella, because he does everything for the team. You know, he's box to box. He's industrious. He's running everywhere. He's covering. He's pressing. He's passing. So those 2 have to have great games for Inter to stand a chance. And I think obviously Pep is already probably working on a game plan to shut down Barella. Having said that, the entire midfield as a unit has been great. I think one interesting decision that Inzaghi's faced with is what to do in the midfield, because Mkhitaryan's coming back from injury and he's been the favored option in the Champions League, and Brozovic coming off the bench. But Brozovic, in my opinion, starting Brozovic just allows the team to really be able to breathe, because he's so calm on the ball and distributing the ball, and he starts so low in the defense that he really can carry the team upwards in a way that Çalhanoğlu sometimes is not able to in that center defensive position. So I think that that's a really interesting decision that Inzaghi has to make, is if you start Brozovic, then obviously Çalhanoğlu moves forward and plays alongside Barella as the trequartisti, or do you start Çalhanoğlu defensively and have Mkhitaryan lined up alongside Barella? So the midfield's going to be super interesting. Obviously, Manchester City have a fantastic midfield that is capable of just controlling the ball and just really dictating tempo. So I think the game will be won and lost in the midfield.
That's a really good point you make there. I think the midfield is crucial. We saw that in the Milan derby, for example. I think it is also a really good point that you pointed out Bastoni, because he's a player that's, I try to watch Serie A, I try to pay attention. So I was always be like, okay, yeah, he seems like a pretty reliable defender. But it wasn't until this Champions League run that I really began to appreciate how important he is to this Inter side. And I would even argue he's one of the best center backs in the world. And you mentioned it already, that cross to Barella against Benfica. The first time I saw that, I didn't even know that was Bastoni. I thought that was Çalhanoğlu sending in that cross. It was a pinpoint cross from extremely far out. And, of course, a great header from Barella as well. But I remember watching Barella at the Euro, so I already knew how talented of a player he was and how important he is to this Inter side. When you look at, this team overall, do you think that the characterization of them being because I've heard this in the media a lot, this is an old team, they're not able to buy any new players. This team is old. This is their last ride. If whether or not they win here or not, they're not really going to go that anywhere near this far next season. Do you think that's true at all? Or because, there are financial issues in the background for Inter Milan. That also just adds to the miracle that they made it to the final with all this crazy stuff going on in the background. But you look at these players like Mkhitaryan, Dzeko, even Çalhanoğlu to a certain extent. Lukaku's not as young either. There's a lot of guys in this team that are kind of in their mid to early 30s, so what do you say to that? Is this team the veteran team? Are they just a bunch of old guys going out for one last ride?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I have to be honest, because when Inter won the Champions League in 2010, it was a culmination of years of success domestically, but that team was quite old. The core was old, and that was probably part of the reason that with Moratti being the owner, not being able to reinvest and brighten up the team, that led to a really dark period of 8 years for Inter. I don't think that we're faced with the same situation now, where it's win, have this great moment and then the team will be dismantled. I don't think it's like that, because the money that Inter's getting from this Champions League run, combined with qualifying for the Champions League, meaning that even if we lose, our spot in the Champions League is guaranteed for next season, and some positive signals coming from Zhang, the current owner, that I don't think there's going to be any big sacrifices. Meaning, I'd say if we were considering the big three as far as both what the amount of money they'd go for and their importance to the team, Lautaro, Barella, Bastoni, none of those I think are going to be going anywhere. Bastoni is really close to signing a new contract. Barella seems very happy at Inter. Lautaro, with Handanovic leaving and Brozovic maybe on his way out, he's the captain, he's the number 10, he's the star player, and has a great relationship with Zanetti, who's the vice president of Inter. So I think those three players not only staying, but, having this attitude of this is our team really helps me as a fan be confident of our future. But like you said, the average age is old. There's no way around that. But I think a lot of that average age is due to some players on the bench, your Handanoviches, your D'Ambrozios, who are not really key figures. So you look at that average age, it's really high. But when you look at actually who's on the field week in, week out, I don't think the age is as old. It really depends, though. I would say it seems like Onana, who has been the unsung hero of Inter this season, he's been fantastic. might be one of the few concessions that the ownership makes as far as like trying to bring some money in. I've seen some links with him possibly going to Chelsea or another big team who's looking for a goalkeeper. I really hope it doesn't happen because his attitude, he's just such a leader on the field, which is what Inter lacked with Handanovic. Aside from his goalkeeping ability and his ability to play with his feet, which is something that Inter haven't had in forever, a goalkeeper who's really confident with his feet. He is a born leader. I think sometimes people can see that, and I know that he's had some issues with his national team, and at Ajax, things weren't always simple. But I think some of that just comes from the fact that he's a leader. He'll yell at players. And as a new player coming in, that I think surprised some of the Inter players. Okay, who's this guy who comes in and is barking orders? But at the same time, he's proven that he knows what he's doing. And something that is kind of funny is he's the player on our team who probably going into this season had the most Champions League experience, which is pretty crazy to think about. I mean, obviously that run being 2 minutes away from the Champions League final, he played every game for that Ajax team in 2019. So I think he's just someone I want to shout out as having been a big influence and I think big reason why Inter's where they are this season in the Champions League.
Yeah, that is a really good shout. Onana has been immaculate in goal. One brief side note, and then we'll get to your final match prediction. To the audience watching, if you're someone like Julian and I who are fans of collecting soccer jerseys, we're always looking at the soccer jerseys. Why has Inter's Digital Bits sponsorship that you see here not been on the shirt as of recently in the past month or so? I this is a genuine question that I have, because I knew it had something to do with cryptocurrency or the company not being able to pay their share or something like that, or uphold their side of the contract. And I believe this is the same issue going on with Roma as well. Personally, I think the kits, both of them, the home and the away and the third kit, all three of them, look much better without the sponsorship. I just got to be honest. The black and blue stripes just look really cool. I initially thought that okay, they're doing like a special thing for the Champions League, but then I saw each and every coming game there was no sponsorship. But what is the reason behind that?
Yeah, so Digital Bits was the new shirt sponsor for this season for Inter and Roma, like you mentioned, and they just never. Early on, it was clear that they were not meeting contractual agreements. They weren't paying what they had agreed with Inter. Inter have been looking for a serious long-term main shirt sponsor since their partnership with Pirelli ended. Pirelli's still a sponsor, but they just weren't paying enough to be the main shirt sponsor. They still are a partnership of the club. They had a year with Socios fan token agreement that was sort of like a 1-year experiment. And then this year, a lot of fans are happy because they saw, mouthwatering 20 million euro agreement with Digital Bits. However, things kind of happened with crypto, and I guess that they decided they just weren't going to pay. Inter kept them on the jersey for longer than a lot of people expected, even though payments weren't happening. I think just so they could get on a legal sense, just everything sorted out to then ask for compensation. And Roma took a different approach and replaced recently with SPQR with like a ancient Roman slogan, which I think looks really clean. Inter, though, I just want to add, signed a shirt sponsorship for the final and for today's game against Torino. They've signed the shirt sponsorship with Paramount Plus, the American streaming service. So Paramount Plus will be on the front of the jerseys for both the last league game and the Champions League final. I think it's like a 10 million agreement, which is really great for Inter. They need the money. And it will be on the back of the jerseys. I believe next season, Paramount Plus will be in the back of the jerseys. But that's kind of some background why Digital Bits and why there was a stage with the shirts not having a sponsor, which, like you said, I think was kind of for shirt nerds such as ourselves, not a bad thing. It's kind of gives a unique look. There's not a lot of big clubs who don't have main shirt sponsors, but for the final, it will be Paramount Plus on the front.
That is super interesting. I did not know that at all. That'll be like really cool to see how that plays out. And I'm sure a bunch of collectors are going to look for those Inter shirts with the Paramount Plus logo on the front, which, like you said, is only going to be for these 2 matches here. And I do think that for Roma's case, with the SPQR, I think that's the correct order of the letters there in the acronym. I personally, as someone who likes history, as a history major, I think that was that's super cool. It looks way better anyway. But now let's go on to, I guess, the most important part of the video. How do you see this match in the Champions League final playing out? What is your score prediction?
Yeah, I as an Italian, we are a little bit superstitious. We don't love to say match predictions before the game happens, to be completely honest. But I have to be positive, and I'm going to just say 1-1 and goes to extra time, and then on penalties, I'm not going to say what happens.
Yeah, that's fair. I didn't know that Italians have that superstition. If I did, then I wouldn't have asked you that. I'm sorry about that, because I am very superstitious myself, especially when it comes to these things. As for me, I mean, I'm going to wait till after this game against Torino to kind of finalize my prediction, I would say. I think, of course, Man City are the favorites. They're going to be, the team with the higher chance to win. But I don't know, man. Something about this Inter team, just the form that they're in at the moment, specifically in cup tournaments. So the way they played against Fiorentina, which I thought Fiorentina played well. I thought Fiorentina played pretty good, but Inter was very strong defensively. They were very clinical. Lautaro, in particular, had a very, very great game. I think there's also this just kind of humorous vibe around the Inter locker room. I mean, this joyous vibe. The players look like they're having fun. I don't know if you saw Lautaro Martinez just got married the other day, and then there's all these jokes with Lukaku was spotted with the American rapper Megan Thee Stallion. So now it's like everyone's making these jokes like, oh yeah, everyone's just in a good mood, everyone's doing fine, they're just, everyone's happy, So I don't know, something about this team is just like, and then it's a cliche at this point, but Pep overthinking in finals and Pep bottling it in the Champions League, it's a cliche. I think it's overplayed. But at the same time, I mean, look, we were at a similar position in 2021. Man City got to the final against Chelsea. Man City were very heavily the favorites. Pep didn't play a defensive midfielder for whatever reason, had this really odd formation, and Chelsea were just clinical, and Chelsea ended up winning the whole thing. So, I don't know. I'm not going to, like you, I'm not going to formally put the hand down yet and say which team I think is going to win, but I don't think it's going to be a steamroll. I don't think it's going to be 4-5-0 to City like a lot of people are saying. So, any concluding remarks?
Yeah, like you said, I think the atmosphere at Inter right now is very positive. Lautaro's wedding, they had the grigliata, like the team barbecue this past week, and the morale is really high. So I think that the team is going to fight. I think the owner has given an extra million, like 5 million bonus to the team for if they win. So I think it's just the atmosphere is in around the team leads me to be positive about what could happen. And like you said, I don't think it's going to be very super one-sided. Having said that, there is the elephant in the room, the man we haven't mentioned by name on the other team, Erling Haaland, who does put some fear in me. But I think Acerbi, he's Acerbi's best at man marking. That's what he does. He likes to get close to the attacker. He likes to really leave a mark, if you know what I mean. So I think Acerbi's going to try and do his best and in that matchup with Haaland. But like you said, anything can happen. And yeah, Forza Inter.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us here, Julian. It's always great to hear from someone who's so passionate about a team, someone who has such an inside knowledge, especially with a team like Inter, because here in the United States, there's not a lot of Serie A fans in comparison to, say, Barcelona, Real Madrid, or just any Premier League team. So it was great to have you on. If you ever are interested in coming back, just let me know, of course. But anyway, to the people watching, thank you very much for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think is going to happen. Let us know if you have any questions towards Julian, type those in the comments. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Like I said, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys later. Thank you very much for joining again, Julian.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Sempre li vivrò nerazzurri, questa mia speranza è l'assenza, no vivo senza. Amala, pazza intera amala, è una gioia infinita che dura una vita, pazza intera amala.
Julio.
Seguila.